We're going to talk a lot about history and memory today, and I am going to attempt to uh, see the chat while it's happening, although I cannot guarantee that I will get that right. Oh, here we go. See the so um, everyone, hi, welcome to Freedom Over Fascism. I have Kevin Levin here of Civil War Memory, and if you haven't subscribed to both of us, please do. And if you can hit those hearts as hard as you can, that would be great. And today, I wanted to talk. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and Kevin and I have talked about it before, but this week has been very accelerated. And so this week, orders came down for the National Park Service to change some of their signs at historical spaces and monuments and sites. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about the Smithsonian and all the things.
Yeah. So as you said, and first, thanks for having me back, Stephanie. Great to be with you. But as you mentioned, this week, it's been reported that National Park Service sites are now in the process of having to comply with the president's executive order, which was issued back in March. And you can read that for yourself, this sort of what he called restoring sanity and truth to American history. And in that order, he had singled out the Park Service and the Smithsonian for spreading what he would refer to as a corrosive ideology, right? And a lot of that has revolved around the history of slavery, the history of white supremacy in this country. And so over the summer, the Park Service individual sites had to examine all of their interpretive materials. So exhibits, wayside markers, and other interpretive assets, and had to figure out whether or not these materials complied with the president's executive order and a follow-up order that came down from the Interior Secretary. There has been really no guidance. No one in the Park Service that I've talked to has any idea who has gone through and reviewed all of this over the course of the summer, what guidelines they were following, and the implementation of this order, as we're learning this week, has really been haphazard. Still, no one in the Park Service really has a clear idea of even how their individual sites are supposed to comply, whether it means removal of certain things, whether it means covering them up. So there's a lot of confusion, and there are a lot of questions that remain within the Park Service. But we do know that, for example, at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, it looks like some signs that tell the story of George Washington's enslaved laborers that accompanied him to Philadelphia when he lived there as president will be removed. At Manassas National Battlefield, a wayside marker that was placed next to a monument of Confederate General Stonewall Jackson that placed the monument in broader context with other Confederate monuments that had been dedicated between 1890 and 1930. That has to be removed, apparently. And then the example that's getting the most attention is coming out of Georgia, Savannah specifically, the image of, or what's known as the scourged back, this famous, iconic image of an enslaved man posing with his back to the camera, and of course, a scarred back. And apparently that needs to be removed. So all of this information is coming out piecemeal. There's sort of conflicting reports about certain things. So it's not clear what's happening right now. And that is, I think, part of what we should talk about, part of the overall problem here that we're facing, that the Park Service specifically is facing.
Well, it would not surprise me in the least. And Vicky says, I'm sure they have no guidelines, that some sort of AI went through the reports and flagged words here and there. And
that's very possible, given what we know about earlier this year, when a lot of the computers throughout the federal government, especially related to places like the Defense Department, Arlington National Cemetery, we know that AI went through and scrubbed because we know that a lot of the references that had to be removed turned out to be just utterly ridiculous. So a reference to the B-29 bomber that dropped the atomic bomb on one of two on Japan was known as the Enola Gay. That had to be removed because of the word gay.
Right.
So, yes, that is very possible. One of the questions we just can't answer right now.
Right. Tracy says that they've been requesting park visitors all over the country to take pictures of the signage, and I think that is a great idea, like to make that archive.
Yes.
What I'm interested in all of this, but so those wayside markers and museums, whether they're plantation museums or slave quarter museums or the Smithsonian, are there for a reason, to um, help us memorialize our past so the public knows where we've been. But when but all along, generally, somebody's making the decisions about what to put on those wayside markers, as we see, and what not to, what to include in a museum and what not to. Um, so this time around, it seems pretty obvious what the regime is trying to achieve, but um, can you tell me what you think that they're trying to achieve by erasing some of these markers, not all, based on who reported them, which is why I think it's AI. Um, but what do you think is the purpose of this?
So I think the Trump administration has a vested interest in controlling the historical narrative. I mean, for a number of reasons, but I assume one of the most important ones is because controlling how Americans think about its collective past, its collective history, directly connects to how we think about the present moment and the future of this country. So, with an administration that, has taken every step imaginable to cut things like, DEI programs, to continue the sort of push against affirmative action, anything related to the history of race in this country in the present moment is obviously connected to its history. And so downplaying or minimizing or trying to just hide the history of racial struggle, the history of white supremacy, and the lingering effects of slavery itself, I think is one way to shape again how we think about these policies today. In a way, it's an attempt to shape voters. Um, and I think that is the future-oriented part of all of this, right? I mean, it's about controlling, it's about the power to control information, whether it's the information about things that are happening right now, and it's an attempt to control information about where we've come from. And I think all of this is interconnected. I want to make one point about this because, look, I think we need to acknowledge that this history has always been politically divisive um, over the last few decades. I think both the right and the left have had an interest in emphasizing certain aspects of our past and downplaying others. That shouldn't surprise anyone, but I do think it's important to understand and appreciate just how radically different what we're witnessing right now, how different that is, and how unprecedented it is. I've been following these issues for a couple decades now, 25 years roughly. I've never seen a Republican or Democratic administration that has taken the steps that the Trump administration has taken to basically just hamper down and control, um, you know, the National Park Service and the Smithsonian. It was George W. Bush who approved the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Um, he was proud of that. We can talk about other aspects of the Bush administration, but I think emphasizing that is a reminder that, in large part, Americans I think, are united around the importance of this history. I don't think this is a politically this is a political issue. I think it's an issue of power, for the Trump administration, and I think that is something that we need to recognize. Um, that people who visit National Park Service sites and the Smithsonian are Democrats, are Republicans. They are they come from across the political spectrum. And I think that's something we really do need to appreciate and acknowledge.
I agree. And this is unprecedented that they have removed all of these markers and have screwed with the Smithsonian. But if we think about it, already in the 1920s and 30s, there was the Lost Cause movement
Yeah,
to try to rewrite the history of the Civil War that
yeah,
wasn't about slavery. And, you had culture, Gone with the Wind, um, Birth of a Nation, that was trying to rewrite the story
yeah. Oh,
of the Civil
absolutely.
War.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, in some senses, it's part of a continuum. Is that something that you would agree with, or what do you think about that, even though it's different in kind?
Yeah, I sort of resist. There is a very popular kind of narrative that you'll find, especially on social media, that attempts to cast Trump as sort of the quote unquote Confederate president. I kind of resist that because I don't think Trump really has any interest in history, the Confederacy, the Civil War more generally, or really any American history. I think he is just a downright ignorant individual. But I think he does see the importance, the opportunity in terms of controlling it, manipulating it, using it to cause the kind of chaos that we've seen over the last few months. So I do agree with you that the sort of popularity of the Lost Cause, during that period that you referenced, is helpful to appreciate that history in its public in the public context has always been divisive politically. Certainly, Southern conservatives understood that if you could control how the country or the region remembered the Civil War and Reconstruction, that served as a justification for Jim Crow politics. It served as a justification for keeping African Americans as second class citizens. If your public memory, if your monuments frame the history of slavery as the history of the loyal slave, if African Americans, if it's true that they never really wanted to be free because slavery was so wonderful, as the Lost Cause argues, then of course you are justified in keeping, I think, them as second class citizens, whether that means legally through constitutions, state constitutions, or through violent means at times. I do want to say, in contrast with the Lost Cause, I do think that we need to remind ourselves that the Lost Cause, its hold on this country, has really waned in the last few decades. And I think that's one of the reasons why there has been this pushback against the Smithsonian and the National Park Service. This history of slavery that is on the chopping block, if you will, is now very much, I would argue, the mainstream view. The Smithsonian and the National Park Service are not radical agencies. They are not pushing the envelope of public history forward. From my perspective, they are responding to cultural shifts in this country. They are responding to changes and developments in the world of academia. And so, if you're a radical, if you're an activist wanting to undermine the United States through through history, the Smithsonian and the National Park Service are probably the last places that you want to find yourself because they're both bureaucracies. It's, things get done very slowly, if not at all, if they get done at all. There's a lot of frustration from people who work in these agencies. But of course, they do make progress. And so the progress that we've seen is really important to acknowledge. And that's why I think this is so important to fight for, because it has become, as I suggested, very much the mainstream view. And so that's why I am optimistic about the future. But we do need to be vigilant right now because there still is a lot that we can lose in all of this.
Well, as we talk about the future, if the regime starts really rewriting the narrative of what human enslavement was and the violence of it, and um, while our generation remembers, uh, knowing more about it, popular culture, movies, books, whatever, future generations, like probably not my kid who's about to go to college, but like maybe his kids will not have if they're erased from the public record, they won't have the resources to be able to really understand. And I also think that the saying, the past in the South, the past isn't the past. Uh, we saw 2 lynchings this week.
Mm.
And so I wonder what the connection is between whitewashing history and the resurgence of lynching
Yeah.
and other violent ways to assert white supremacy.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right to bring up those two examples. I think that story still needs to, there's still a lot of unknowns about
Right.
that. So I'm going to sort of, I don't want to sort of go into that specifically. I am, I do think that your comment, your overall comment does speak to the importance of, maintaining vigilance right now and pushing back whenever possible against, what the Trump administration is doing right now. I am a bit more optimistic, though, about the future. I actually think that the reason that we are seeing this pushback is because I think the reason the way we should understand it is as a kind of rear guard action. I don't see this really having any long term impact on public memory. In fact, I think the public memory is now fueled. Uh, it's not fueled by anything centralized, right? We have, of course, um, digital sources, the internet more broadly. Local communities, of course, shape our public memory of all of this. Um, and so, I do think we still have over 3 more years of this administration. Let's just forget about what happens next November. But I am a bit more optimistic about the future. I don't see us going back toward a lost cause public memory of the war. It's the question of whether or not the agencies that represent us as a nation, namely agencies like the Smithsonian, where people come from all over the world to learn about what America is. I think those are the places that we need to stand up for because they perform such an important function at that level. Um, and so I think for that reason alone, they are worth defending. But they do speak, of course, to what's happening across the country. I don't want to minimize that. I mean, the Smithsonian does work in communities across the country through traveling exhibits, through their work helping educators in the classroom. So the tentacles are there. I mean, there's a lot going on, but right now I'm still holding out.
Well, I'm glad one of us is.
Yeah.
Um, because I also want to talk. I mean, they've also started, they being whoever they is, uh, the regime, or changing curriculum, both in high school, where most of the textbooks are written in Texas, um, and AP curriculum.
Hmm.
And we're not even going to start talking about AP US history, because that's an entire rant that we
I
can have
taught it
right
for
now.
years. Yeah, I taught it for years. Yeah.
I know. Um, I went through it with my kid last year, and then I learned it back when I'm 35 years ago. Um, but as curriculum changes, I wonder how much curiosity of a younger generation will be able to continue to sustain itself if they don't necessarily know, um,
Mm.
what they're missing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I think we'll just have to wait. I mean, I think we have to, I mean, that I think is the justification for why we do need to continue to do this work. I mean, I spent, 20 plus years in the classroom teaching history. I spend most of my time, throughout the year working with history teachers around the country through professional development programs. And all I see is optimism. All I see, I mean, there are a lot of people who are depressed as anything about what's happening right now. But man, the teachers I come into contact with, and even the students that I take on tours of historic sites, I see a lot of enthusiasm. I see a lot of curiosity out there. I think, to bring it back to the NPS for a second, you know, Trump ordered earlier this summer for each National Park Service site to put up QR codes throughout, the visitor center and then on the grounds. And, I've visited a number of battlefields over the summer. I was leading a number of tours, and everyone, it's funny, talking to my friends in the Park Service and then reading the reports that came out in the news about this, it turns out that overwhelmingly visitors to these places left positive comments. They thought the idea of reporting, on problematic material was itself ridiculous. And I think that speaks to the fact that Americans want to learn history, right? And I think that continued curiosity is going to push us through this. I may be, of course, naive. I'm certainly willing to entertain that, but I just haven't seen any noticeable downturn, or move away from that. I'm kind of just, I'm impressed by um, the continued interest, the consistent, interest and curiosity out there. Park services bring in a huge amount of money. I mean, we're seeing record attendances at, across the NPS, and I assume that's true across historic sites more generally. Um, we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, and I guess I see the same thing, in the field of education. We have a lot of problems that have to be addressed. There's no question about that. But again, from my perspective, um, I'm sort of emboldened by it.
Well, that's a really good point of view because it it gives some hope. And as I say over and over again, hope isn't a state of mind; it's a series of actions.
Mm-hmm.
And
Good point. Yeah, that's important.
I wonder how we're how if the Park Service and the Smithsonian and the institutional ways of conveying public history are changed, how we might uh, teach that history. You said people are interested in history. Well, in what ways do they like to consume information about history? Do we need to, make more films? Do we need to, write more historical um, novels? Do we, um, does there need to be more, monographs?
Yeah.
Um, what do you think that, let's start from not us, but, you know, kids, high school, college kids, and younger.
Oh, yeah,
Why?
yeah. All of the above, and that's what I see around me. You go to a local bookstore, and a one that has a decent selection. And I see a wide range of subjects that are being addressed, things that I, couldn't have imagined just a few decades ago. It seems like that sort of thirst for knowledge is there in terms of the books we're consuming. I assume that let's use as one example. Next month, Ken Burns's PBS documentary on the revolution is going to air. Now, I know a lot of my friends in academia are, some of them will never be happy with anything that Ken Burns does, and certainly I have my issues with some of what he has produced. That's of course normal, but I assume that a lot of Americans are going to tune in for that series, and they're going to hear from some remarkable historians like Annette Gordon-Reed and others who have devoted their lives to researching and writing about and engaging the public about the history of slavery. I assume we're going to see a lot of books published, starting roughly now and then through next year for the 250th. I assume that a lot of local communities are going to find ways to host discussions, organize perhaps local exhibits that tell local stories. I assume that we're going to see a lot in the classroom that addresses the 250th. Workshops next summer for teachers, and as well as this past summer, that address various topics related to the 250th. I think all of the things that you just referenced, I'm seeing out there. And that, I think, has to encourage us and has to sort of push us to continue to do this work that I think both of us know or value, that we've devoted our lives to, essentially. And so, again, I think everything that is out there now, I see continuing. Books for children, um, video games that might have some kind of positive impact in the way people think about um, American history. I just read a book of essays that sort of focus on how video games can encourage historical thinking and reflection. So I think there are all kinds of things that are going on, and they're all, what's important, I guess, is it is decentralized. We are at a point now where no one institution has control over the broader historical narrative, and that's a good thing. And it's problematic at the same time. I mean, it's nice that we live at a time when when those traditional gatekeepers are no longer there. I mean, we have the ability to share our interest in history, um, you know, whatever perspective that is, access to historical materials, you know, through various digital repositories. All of that is unimaginable just a couple decades ago. And at the same time, the fact that there are no gatekeepers is incredibly problematic, right? I mean, what does it
Right.
mean to be an expert in this field? Um, so we have to figure out ways to balance it all out. And of course, hovering over everything, and you alluded to this earlier, AI. What does it mean in terms of education? How is it going to shape public history? How do we teach our students to evaluate websites or films, videos on YouTube now that increasingly I'm finding are just AI produced, right? But those are the same questions that I think we had to deal with when the internet first came into our lives. How do you evaluate websites? How do you evaluate news? All of these things. Just that we have to make a commitment as a nation to do these things, and whether we do so is, I have no idea.
My
That I'm
guess is,
pessimistic about.
well, I think that part of it is going to be, in some sense, regional.
Yep.
There will be, in some places, um, deep dives into uh, historic or stories about the past that are closer to reality. And then there are some regions where that won't be the
Yeah.
case.
Who has the money?
Um, who has the money
Who has the
and
funding?
the will and the interest to do all that? And I think
Yep.
that that is part of the bifurcation or multifurcation of, I guess it's
Yeah.
balkanization
Yeah.
of our country right now. But I can't help but think one thing we haven't talked about um, uh, is the musical Hamilton. Kids in school are that's how they learn their history. And my kid was a counselor at overnight camp this year. The 11-year-olds were, you know, totally into it.
Hmm.
And it's 10 years. I mean, it's almost as
It's
old
yeah.
as they are.
Yeah.
So, what more kinds of thing? And, it's not exact history, but I know Joanne Freeman was part of and what's his name that wrote the book? Um, I'm talking Chernow,
Oh, yeah. Right.
both involved. i- Is how can we continue to make culture reflect the stories that we want. It's all about stories, as everything is what story are we going to tell and how are we going to tell it?
Yeah.
Um, and I lost my train of thought. Um, and there are a couple of TV shows just letting people know, like there's one from a couple years ago called Turn America's Spies,
Hmm.
which I found to be very uh, realistic, showing the enslaved man that Washington brought to the front, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I think seeking those out and letting people know where they can find that is really important. Um,
I've really enjoyed, just to throw one in there. I mean, it's not the Revolution, but I've really enjoyed. My wife and I have both enjoyed the Gilded Age. Is that what it's
oh,
called? Yeah.
yes, it's Gilded Age
Yeah.
is
Gilded Age.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
And my first, no, I don't know that any of you will care, but my first college history class was on the, from 1890 to 1920. And I thought, oh my God, the Gilded Age, we have to learn about that again. And no, there was so much more going on that wasn't about high society, that was about labor, that was about education, all of these things. And
Yeah.
I a little part of me worries that we'll always think of the Gilded Age, that period as the Gilded Age, uh, but that's better, I guess, than nothing.
Yeah. And I think to expect anything more is maybe not is asking perhaps a bit too much. I mean, I sort of every once in a while you hear people who complain that kids today don't know anything, they don't care about history, and all you have to do is go back to, like, the New York Times in, like, the 1940s and 1930s, and they'll you can find stories where they basically survey what high school kids know and don't know about American history, and you get the sense not much has really changed over the last few decades.
Well, not only
Um,
that, but every generation seems to be like, "Oh my god,
yeah,
we're going to hell in a handbasket," like,
yeah,
going back, way back, and into industrialization. So, like, knowing that that is an ongoing theme and it's not just, "Oh, this new generation is so screwed." Well, they said that about us, and they said
right.
that about the generation before, and
But yeah, but you're also suggesting something really important about the space where we are currently in, because yeah, I mean, there is a lot to worry about. And, it almost seems like the default position, and some of you may find this funny that, this is coming from someone who specializes in the history of the Civil War era, but the default response is we're heading toward another civil war, or how likely it is. A media site will ask, and survey some people, how likely do you think it is that we're going to end up in Civil War 2.0? And my response is always, does your memory of this country go back any further than the last month or so? I mean, we have always been divided. There are moments, perhaps, when certainly been more divided than we currently are, not just the Civil War. That can be instructive. The 1850s can certainly be instructive. But what about the post-Civil War era? What about, the labor strikes and the clampdowns on um, on labor in the late 19th century. What about the Red Scares of the post-World War I era? There are so many other moments in American history that can help us right now, that can provide really important historical context. And I think not because it offers us a solution to where we are, but it might give us some grounding from which we can begin to more carefully assess the current situation and maybe give us some direction for the future.
Um, I think that's a really good point. And as you make a civil, so I'm sort of on the fence of this whole Civil War situation. It's not gonna, if there is one, it isn't gonna look like two armies like facing off at Antietam. I mean, um, but I've been thinking a lot about soft secession recently and what blue states are doing to try to reclaim their own states' rights against the federal government and what you know southern states have done in the past. Um, so I'm not sure what a civil war would actually look like, but I do agree that there are so many moments. The Red Scare, post World War I, is when all the people who were in power during the McCarthy era came up and started learning about the way the world works. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things that I got early on is we got to look at when the people who are making decisions uh, kind of became adults. When did they form their political positions and how? Because that'll
Yeah.
teach us a lot about what's going on now. That is a major digression. Um, I want to in the chat. Deborah asked, "Is do we know what's being done with the artifacts, whether physical or digital, after they've been removed? Are they being stored or destroyed? Do you know that?"
Yeah. Okay. So again, I think it's really important to sort of understand that in terms of what has been removed, as far as I can tell, and I assume she's asking about both, say, the Smithsonian or the National Park Service. Um, as far as I understand, nothing really has been removed from the Smithsonian. I mean, there were some questions about an exhibit at the American History Museum about Trump's impeachment a couple weeks back. There's that. But other stories about artifacts being removed from the African American History Museum have not turned out to be true. The National Park Service, again, it's really difficult to know because we're just not getting the information, and even my contacts in the National Park Service, I can't get much information from them right now because they don't know. So I think we just have to wait a little bit, at least in reference to the National Park Service. The Smithsonian, of course, keep in mind, the president doesn't have any direct authority over it, right? The Smithsonian is governed by a governing body. The president has some appointee power, but the larger number of members are from outside of the executive branch. So that relationship, of course, he can certainly exert a great deal of pressure. I don't want to be Lonnie Bunch right now, the director of the Smithsonian, but they appear to be weathering the storm right now. We'll have to follow that as well. So I wish I could give her a more accurate sort of assessment right now, but I don't think we really know.
In general, museums, history and art, have way more in their collections than our
Oh,
exhibit. And I'm
yeah.
not sure that people realize how much is behind the scenes
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
staying there. I can't imagine that they'd actually, I don't know. My imagination isn't big enough these days, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot there.
There have been instances of so at the art museum in DC, I forgot which one artist chose not to exhibit her work there because of the pressure from Trump. So there are those examples where I guess artists are, going elsewhere. But yeah, that's where we are right now.
Right. Let's see if anybody who's with us has some questions. We've got almost 75 people here,
Great.
and I'm going to look at the chat. So if you have questions, stick them in the chat and we will do what we can to discuss it or answer. Carrie says the entire inventory of the NPS holdings and on loans should be on some kind of quick access blockchain equivalent system. I'm not entirely sure what she means by that, but maybe you do.
I'm not entirely sure. There are a couple websites where, so I do know there are people in the National Park Service system who are keeping track of they're taking photographs, they're keeping track of what they have. And I think it's the Organization of American Historians, on their website, they started kind of a digital, they sort of created a digital space where people could upload, I guess, images of things that have been deleted from websites, things like that. And I assume that also holds for material artifacts. So there are organizations that are working to find ways to keep track of all of this. But right now, I think some people have in mind again that a lot has been lost, and that's not my assumption at all right now. That's why I do think we need to. Carrie's point is important, that we do need to find ways to keep track of all of this. And it's also, I think, look, I've been saying this on my newsletter for months now. There are ways that we can, support the NPS and Smithsonian. Visit a National Park Service site, become a member of the Smithsonian, or even a local museum. Attend an event in your neighborhood. Find ways to show support, because these institutions reflect the public. Right? Again, they are responding to where we are as a nation right now. They're not sort of leading the charge forward. They are very much, I think, responding to the state of the country as it is. And if we demand certain things, a lot of these institutions will deliver, because that's their job.
Right. And it's also really decentralized. I know the Boston Public Library has immense um, collections of digital archives that anyone can access.
That's right.
And I'm sure there are a lot of other libraries and museums who have that as well. So all is not lost.
That's right. The
Um,
people still have a great deal of power here. Absolutely.
any other questions from the crowd? Nope. Nope. All right, let's I guess wrap it up. But you feel you feel optimism, and can you tell us just kind of like in one sentence or two why you feel that, and then plug all of your stuff.
When I go to National Park Service sites, I see crowds, I see people learning, I see people asking questions. I see the same thing at, when I go to the Smithsonian. I was just there over the summer. Mall was packed, museums were packed. I think we are in an unprecedented place. And I think we have, all of us, a responsibility to stand up and be counted at this point in time. And I think if we do that, I think we can weather this storm. There will be damage. It will take time to repair it, but we will get through this.
Well, that is a
All I got.
sentiment. I mean, what other chance? I mean, like, I think I think we're looking at a long timeline, but we Americans need to start to think in longer timelines than we
Yes,
typically do. We want things
absolutely.
instantaneously.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Oh, do you want to plug your anything?
Well,
Go for it.
I'll plug my newsletter. I mean, I've been getting subscriptions over the course of this conversation. So I run the newsletter, Civil War Memory. It's a blog that I started all the way back in 2005. So this coming November is my 20th anniversary writing online about the Civil War, the history and memory of the Civil War. I've written a bunch of books, and my next book comes out next year. It's a biography of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, and that's coming out with the University of North Carolina Press.
Awesome. I'm glad that you've gotten new subscribers. And I want to say about history and memory that we talked a lot about history and how to find ways to research it and the people who are thinking about it. And I'd just like to mention the fact that often the memory, the public story, the story we tell ourselves is more important or as important as the actual facts of what happened, because people will remember the stories much more than they remember the facts.
I couldn't agree with that more. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on. Thank you for all of you who were here, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye.